they are among the most terrifying beings in all of Tolkien's writings. A matriarch who would plunge the world into darkness and make Morgoth himself fear for his life. Her daughter, who would give some of the scariest moments in all of The Lord of the Rings, and the many offspring that would infest some of the most terrifying locations in all the world. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we take a look at Ungoliant, Shelob, and the spiders of Middle-earth. Ungoliant is among the creatures of Middle-earth whose origin is a complete mystery. Some believe she may have been one of the Maiar, though she is not among the known Ainur, who are named by Tolkien. In the Silmarillion, we are told, some have said that in ages long before, she descended from the darkness that lies about Arda, and that in the beginning she was one of those that Melkor corrupted to his service. But she had disowned her master, desiring to be a mistress of her own lust, taking all things to herself to feed her emptiness. In the early days of the world, Ungoliant makes her dwelling in the lands of Avathar, south of Valinor. In a ravine she lived, and took shape as a spider of monstrous form, weaving her black webs in a cleft of the mountains. There she sucked up all light that she could find, and spun it forth again in dark nets of strangling gloom. Though this giant spider-like creature disowned the Dark Lord, she would ally with him once more for a brief time. After Melkor fuels discord among the Noldor living in Valinor, he flees. Making his way south, he comes to Avathar, seeking the aid of Ungoliant. Together they make their way north in secret, Ungoliant cloaking them in an utter darkness. Known as the Unlight of Ungoliant, this ability could be pierced by no eye, for it was a complete void. Masked in darkness, they come to the two trees, which give light to all the lands of Valinor. Morgoth strikes each tree at its base, and Ungoliant puts her wretched fangs to the wounds, drinking the light. She also drains the wells of Varda, so that the only remaining light of the trees lies in the three Silmarils of Feanor. With the world plunged into darkness, Ungoliant and Melkor flee Valinor. But first they would stop at Feanor's home of Formenos. There, Melkor kills Feanor's father, Finwë, and steals a great many jewels, including the Silmarils. Those who survived near Formenos would say that a blind darkness had come northward, and that in its midst there walked some power for which there was no name, and the darkness issued from it. We are given a hint at how powerful the webs of Ungoliant were, and how completely dark and void her unlight was, in the Silmarillion chapter, The Darkening of Valinor. But Manwë from his high seat looked out, and his eyes alone pierced through the night, until they saw a darkness beyond dark, which they could not penetrate. Huge but far away, moving now northward with great speed, and he knew that Melkor had come and gone. Then the pursuit was begun, and the earth shook beneath the horses of the host of Orome, and the fire that was stricken from the hooves of Nahar was the first light that returned to Valinor. But so soon as any came up with the cloud of Ungoliant, the riders of the Valar were blinded and dismayed, and they were scattered, and went they knew not whither, and the sound of the Valaroma faltered and failed. And Tulkas was as one caught in a black net at night, and he stood, powerless, and beat the air in vain. But when the darkness had passed, it was too late. Melkor had gone whither he would, and his vengeance was achieved. His evil task complete, Melkor flees with Ungoliant to Middle-earth, crossing the Helcaraxe and coming to the western shores. In exchange for her help, Melkor had promised to reward her with both hands after their escape from Valinor. One by one, he gives her the jewels he had stolen, yet in his right hand, he withholds the Silmarils, having desired them too greatly for himself. Having devoured the light of the two trees and the lesser jewels, Ungoliant had now grown far more massive and powerful than before. Melkor, on the other hand, had exhausted himself in his deeds of wickedness. She traps Melkor in her webs, and the Dark Lord himself, among the mightiest of the Valar, fears for his life, giving a cry of desperation that echoes about the land. Ungoliant would indeed have killed Melkor in this moment. However, his cry is heard by his Balrogs, who fly with winged speed across the lands of Beleriand to his rescue. Overcome by the fiery whips of the Balrogs, Ungoliant flees to the arid Gorgoroth, the Mountains of Terror. There she would spawn many offspring, who infest the valley to the south, which would come to be known as Nan Dungortheb, the Valley of Dreadful Death. We are told that at one point, Ungoliant attempts to enter King Thingol's realm of Doriath, but is repelled by the power of Queen Melian, the Maya. As told in the Silmarillion, Ungoliant went down into Beleriand and dwelt beneath Ered Gorgoroth, in that dark valley that was after called Nan Dungortheb, the Valley of Dreadful Death, because of the horror that she bred there. For other foul creatures of spider form had dwelt there since the days of the delving of Angband, and she mated with them and devoured them. And even after Ungoliant herself departed, and went whither she would into the forgotten south of the world, her offspring abode there, and wove their hideous webs. As for the other spiders of the First Age, they continued to dwell in Nan Dungortheb long after Ungoliant had left. Aside from spiders, all living things avoided that valley, even the courageous Noldor, who would only pass it on paths closest to Doriath. It is said that the waters that came into that valley from the mountains were defiled and would fill the hearts of those who drank from them with both madness and despair. We are told Ungoliant abode a long time under the shadow of the precipices in which Dorthonion fell southward, and they became known as the Arid Gorgoroth, the Mountains of Terror, and none dared go thither or pass nigh them. Their life and light were strangled, and their all waters were poisoned. We are told of two people who dared to cross this cursed land, and succeeded. The first is Arethel, the daughter of the High King Fingolfin. She rides eastward from her brother's city of Gondolin with a group of elves. However, their party is separated by the shadows of the land. While her companions are chased away by the spiders, Arethel makes her way to Himlad, successfully crossing the valley. The second instance comes in the tale of Beren and Luthien. After his father's company is destroyed by orcs, Beren is a lone outlaw in the woods of Dorthonion. Eventually, the forces of Morgoth would come all too close to catching him, forcing him to flee south. He passes over the Mountains of Terror and the Valley of Dreadful Death, finally coming to the realm of Doriath, where he first meets Luthien the Fair. While a remarkable achievement to traverse this land, Beren never again spoke of his journey, lest the horror of it return to his mind. As for Ungoliant herself, her disappearance is as mysterious as her origin. However, it is said that she went into the forgotten south of the world shortly before the First Age began. Tolkien tells us, of the fate of Ungoliant, no tale tells. Yet some have said that she ended long ago, when in her uttermost famine, she devoured herself at last. Her descendants would torment the peoples of Middle-earth for thousands of years, across realms and ages of the world. Her most famous offspring would inhabit the mountains between Mordor and Gondor, and spawn dark spiders of her own. Shelob, the dark terror of Cirith Ungol, and her spawn, the spiders of Mirkwood. Though Ungoliant would be long gone, her evil brood would bring terror to the world of men and elves into the latest known days of Middle-earth. She was the dark terror of Cirith Ungol, a great spider who fed on elves, men, and orcs, one of the great monsters of the Third Age and the mother of the spiders of Mirkwood. In the Two Towers, Tolkien paints a vivid picture of Shelob's appearance. Most like a spider she was, but huger than the greatest hunting beasts, and more terrible than they because of the evil purpose in her remorseless eyes. They were lit with a fell light again, clustering in her outthrust head. Great horns she had, and behind her short, stalk-like neck was her huge swollen body, a vast bloated bag, swaying and sagging between her legs. Its great bulk was black, blotched with livid marks, but the belly underneath was pale and luminous and gave forth a stench. Her legs were bent, with great knob joints high above her back, and hairs that stuck out like steel spines, and at each leg's end there was a claw. Shelob was born in the First Age, the offspring of the dark creature Ungoliant, who took the form of a great spider. We'll cover Ungoliant in her own video, but we should note that she was an incredibly formidable force of her own, destroying the two trees of Valinor and nearly killing Melkor were it not for the help of his Balrogs. Sometime after this exodus to Middle-earth, Ungoliant spawns her offspring in a valley near a mountain range in central Beleriand. This mountain chain would be known as the Ered Gorgoroth, the Mountains of Terror, and the valley, as it is taken over by her offspring, is called Nan Dungortheb, the Valley of Dreadful Death. Even the Noldor would not dare to cross this area, and with very few exceptions, every other living thing would avoid it. It's in this area where Beren would one day dare to travel as he flees Dorthonion, where Shelob spends the early centuries of her life. Sometime before the destruction of Beleriand, however, she would make her way to the east, coming to the mountains where she would spend thousands of years and enter the larger story of the Lord of the Rings. There age-long she had dwelt, an evil thing in spider form, even such as once of old had lived in the land of the elves in the west that is now under the sea, such as Beren fought in the Mountains of Terror in Doriath, and so came to Luthien upon the green sward, amid the hemlocks in the moonlight long ago. How Shelob came there, flying from ruin, no tale tells, for out of the dark years, few tales have come. During her time in the Mountains of Shadow, she would spawn more spiders, devouring her mates. Shelob would feed off anything unfortunate enough to cross her path. While this initially included elves and men, they would become more scarce in this region as Sauron takes up residence in Mordor. With men and elves not being as frequent an option, Shelob turns to the orcs for nourishment. Sauron was completely fine with this. He gladly accepted the price of a few orcs here and there, in return for having more security around the passes into his lands. In the Two Towers, it states, "As for Sauron, he knew where she lurked. It pleased him that she should dwell there, hungry but unabated in malice, a more sure watch upon that ancient path into his land than any other that his skill could have devised. And orcs, they were useful slaves, but he had them in plenty. If now and again Shelob caught them to stay her appetite, she was welcome. He could spare them. And sometimes, as a man may cast a dainty to his cat he calls her, but she owns him not, Sauron would send her prisoners that he had no better uses for. He would have them driven to her hole, and report brought back to him of the play she made. So they both lived, delighting in their own devices, and feared no assault, nor wrath, nor any end of their wickedness. Never yet had any fly escaped Shelob's webs. As for Shelob's children, they would spread throughout the Ethel Duath, and north into Mirkwood. These spiders were smaller than Shelob, but still intelligent beyond normal beasts, and had a propensity for evil. When Sauron returns later in the Third Age and takes up residence in Dol Guldur, this return of evil makes Shelob's descendants more bold and aggressive. These were the very spiders that Bilbo and the dwarves encounter during the events of The Hobbit. These spiders were apparently capable of speech, as Bilbo hears them talking about the dwarves. Returning to Shelob in the Mountains of Shadow, we see that she first meets Gollum in 3009 of the Third Age, as he is seeking the One Ring. He becomes trapped by the Great Spider, but manages to convince her to let him leave, promising to bring her more food. Gollum would indeed return on March 11th, 3019, as he accompanies Sam and Frodo on their journey to Mordor. At this time, Gollum lives up to the nickname which the orcs of the Tower of Cirith Ungol called him, Shelob's Sneak. He brings Sam and Frodo into her tunnels, planning to have her dispense with them so that he can reclaim his precious. While Shelob is driven back by the light of the Phial of Galadriel, she would attack again outside the tunnels. While viewers will no doubt be familiar with the depiction of a stinger in Peter Jackson's films, Tolkien's writing, including his letters, points to the phrase sting being used instead to describe her bite. This sting of Shelob would not kill her prey, but put them into a coma-like state, so that their meat could stay fresh for consumption. After she renders Frodo unconscious, Shelob attacks Sam. However, in arguably one of the most impressive feats of the Third Age, Sam defeats the giant spider. As she strides atop him and prepares to crush the hobbit with her massive weight, Sam lets her impale herself on the sword's sting. He then uses the Phial of Galadriel and the spider flees. As for Shelob's ultimate fate after this brutal wound, Tolkien says, Shelob was gone, and whether she lay long in her lair, nursing her malice and her misery, and in slow years of darkness healed herself from within, rebuilding her clustered eyes, until with hunger like death, she spun once more her dreadful snares in the glens of the Mountains of Shadow, this tale does not tell. As for Shelob's offspring, we know that at the end of the War of the Ring, Celeborn and Galadriel destroy the fortress of Dol Guldur. Meanwhile, Thranduil defeats a group of Sauron's forces in the north of the forest. Cleansing their respective portions of Mirkwood, Celeborn and Thranduil meet in the middle and rename it Erin Lasgallen, Wood of Green Leaves. This would lead us to believe that the spiders of Mirkwood were either wiped out or driven away. Though we don't know what ultimately became of Shelob, whether she died of her wounds or lived to hunt her prey into the Fourth Age, one thing is for certain. She and her family were among the most terrifying of all the creatures in Middle-earth. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to all my Patreon and YouTube supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil 19, Lissamy the Cinda, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, CCDC Red Team, Joe Tepper, The Mighty Mim, Andrew Carlisle, Swirled Traveler, Matthew Jeffrey, Viking Lord, Alvin Einbert, Jeremy Daniel Derby, Madame Director, Leo Vittori, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Berto Berg, Graham Derricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Z and N, Evely, Micah Wu, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description to purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Next time on Nerd of the Rings.